So, observations on the future of New Zealand. I want to observe by starting with my one big idea. And that idea is that the future is coming to meet me. Citizens and businesses and organisations in New Zealand are going to need to have more interface with the government and not less. This is not even on a local or regional basis. The reason is because life is increasingly Plan B. We are dealing with the global financial crisis, global warming, earthquakes, tsunamis. There are more issues, they are bigger, they are more complicated, and they are game-changing. Now let me suggest my second idea. I think Māori are ahead of the game. And I think they're ahead of the game because Māori actually are much more sophisticated in understanding how to interface with government. Why? They've had no choice. It's called the treaty, and it's called treaty partnership, and as a consequence of that, they've had to learn about public law. They've had to learn about legislation. They've had to learn about lobbying, dealing with the executive, policy, government departments. When I am advising on treaty issues, it is a public law Pandora's box. And the interesting thing I find is that the way in which government deals with Māori is quite different from the way in which government may deal with other groups of people. It's not about contract, it's always, almost, about legislation. So even with settlements, what do? We have an agreement in principle, but then we have a settlement deed, and then we have legislation. So what I'm saying is that my second idea is that Māori may actually be ahead of the pack in terms of relating with the government. Why do you need to relate? Well, let's think about the Canterbury earthquake. And this morning they're talking about further legislation. Nobody thought anything of it when they pushed through that Canterbury earthquake emergency legislation in less than a day. You know, it was all good stuff. What's the problem? What's the constitutional issue? And then people said, hey, well, how can you knock over that building and not even consult me, not even find me, not even let me get my gear out? And that's the issue. You see, ultimately, these are issues about being able to relate to government and being sophisticated in doing that and understanding what that means. Emergency powers are fine, but processes are also important. And the processes here would have been to identify the owner, to have had to identify the owner, to try and consult, try and let them get their gear out before you do these sorts of things. So I'm interested in this. I think now with a political party, now with political power, with the Māori Party in Parliament, they know how to lobby, and they know how, because they've got their levers on power and government. So all I'm saying is that I think the rest of us are catching up. That's not just in settlement. In 2014, when the government said we're post-settlement, they still have to think about, Māori still have to think about their interrelationship with government, and I still think they're ahead on that front. I think the second idea in terms of the observations is short-termism. Now, Roger Dennis is in this room. He and I have talked about long-term thinking for strategy and for policy. I come from a culture that thinks in terms of 1,000 years. I love advising and talking to Māori. I love when I'm working with the Te Taura Whiri, the Māori Language Commission, because the whole language imports concepts of time which are different. And what I have observed is that the environment we now are in is against long-term thinking. We're almost into managerialism in terms of the way we expect government to respond. Something happens, we expect the Prime Minister to comment about it. Big or small, we expect him to be there. Everyone's saying, well, what's the government doing about it? What's the government position? Media are running after the politicians saying, well, what are you going to do about it? And that worries me simply because some of these things are not issues, frankly, that government should be commenting or managing. And what I'm worried about is that it distracts them from longer-term thinking, and I think social media has made that harder. Tweets, blogs, 24/7 makes that harder, and it worries me because I think about where that's pushing the thinking in terms of our future. The third trend that I've noticed is that we are undoubtedly in a cycle where we are moving towards heavier-handed regulation on every front. And I don't know how long this trend lasts, and I don't know whether this is a cyclical trend or whether with things concerning humans we go to one extreme and then we go to the other extreme. Maybe it was brought on by the global financial crisis where a lot of people said, well, we just trusted the market and it didn't work. People aren't getting the benefit of the doubt now. And we have a right-leaning government at the moment who don't tend to regulate. Remember, Labour's instincts are first to regulate. It's not National's instincts, but yet I'm sure you will find that there is much heavy-handed regulation in every area. And it's not just with respect to the usual suspects, it's also with respect to professions, the whole financial space, and actually in every area. The next trend which I've discovered and which I've observed, because I'm writing a book at the moment, and on the Public Law Toolbox, and what I have discovered is the trend right across that sector, which is the increasing public expectation of accountability and transparency, not just of ministers, not just of officials and MPs, but of the judiciary and of business. And I ask myself, is that because we have rights consciousness and it's increasing? And I think to myself, will we become like America, where there is a lot of litigiousness and a lot of complaints? And how does that transparency change government, all branches of government? And where will that lead? Can it go on indefinitely, just going up and up and up? One of the things that I've been doing for this book is I've been interviewing all of the officers of Parliament and all complaints bodies. And guess what? The trend is inexorably up. More complaints, more requests for inquiries, more complicated inquiries. The next observation is that in terms of constitutional issues, there is a consensus, not for republicanism, which people are always talking about, which I don't really care about, and not about whether or not we should have a supreme constitution, which is really where I do not think the constitutional game is. But there has been a majority of New Zealanders in a poll that say, one, we want to authorise by a majority of the public whenever you are making significant constitutional change. We don't want you to slip that through. We want you to ask us. And of course, at the moment, Parliament is sovereign and all legislation, including legislation of great constitutional import, can be put through by an ordinary statutory process. They don't have to get a mandate. They don't have to get majority at a plebiscite. They don't need an extraordinary majority in Parliament. And so there does seem to be a consensus around New Zealanders that they don't want that. It's a Shape New Zealand poll, and it's in some of my writings. If you want to know about it, get in touch. There has also been a majority saying we want education. We want to know about these things, because sometimes we find out after it's happened that it's happened, and we think they're important. So those are some of my observations, and then what are the obstacles? Well, the obstacles are not surprisingly related to some of these observations. And I think the big one is we don't think it's broken. We don't think it needs fixing. We think that the real discourse or dialogue around anything to do with constitutional law or things to do with government is something about republicanism or supreme law. We don't think it's relevant. We don't think it's important. We don't know about it, and we're not interested in it. As the Chief Justice said, New Zealanders have been, quote, notoriously indifferent throughout our history about our constitutional arrangements and remarkably uncurious about the limits of our constitution. Sir Geoffrey Palmer was slightly blunter. He wrote that, quote, New Zealanders must be amongst the most constitutionally underdeveloped people in the developed world. So it's been interesting because there was also a constitutional review set up and undertaken by a select committee in 2005, and guess what their major problem was? Their major problem was, quote, the difficulty of creating sufficient public engagement on constitutional issues when a society is relatively settled, and to respond to the difficulty of achieving public interest in constitutional matters. At base, New Zealanders don't know very much about how government really works, because the formal documents don't bear much resemblance to how it actually operates. A lot of how it operates, because it's unwritten, is not written down. And as a consequence of that, we don't see the cause and effect. So lots of people moan to me. They say our laws are hopeless, the policy is bad, it's once over the top, it's superficial. But we don't get consulted, but they don't see the cause and effect, the link of our 3-year term of Parliament and the bad policy and laws that we make. Look, it's not Simon Power's fault that he's pushing this through at pace. He clearly wants to end his time in government at the next election. they get 3 years. Effectively, that is 18 months. By the time they get in, get sworn in, get over the exhaustion of the campaigning, get the system cranked up again. Because, of course, as we run up to an election, about May, June, you will start to see the system slowing down and stopping. And a lot of that's already started. Anything controversial, see, you're all nodding your heads because some of you are in the know, and that's why you're in the room. We know how it works in Wellington in an election year. People get hauled in at the start of the year. Don't embarrass us. This is no surprises. I don't want to be bitten. If it's a difficult OIA, I want to see it. And if it's controversial, shelve it. So I've had officials say to me, there are some issues, May, we will never be able to get to the bottom of, because by the time it's complicated and we've elucidated and we've got the discussion document and got the consultation, we're in election year. And the ministers say shelve it because it's controversial and we don't want to upset anybody until after the election. And then after the election, they pick it up again. But of course, only when they've got the capacity to do that. And by then, it's out of date. So they have to start the process all over again. Now, how does that bode for huge issues of the sort that I've just observed and told you about? How do you deal with climate change in an 18-month period of government? Well, you don't. That's what happens. It took us 3-4 goes to get there. And there are a lot of more complicated issues than that we're really not able to have a decent policy discussion about and get decent engagement on. Look, it's not the government's fault, and it doesn't matter who the government is. It's the same pattern that I see over and over again, and it's starting to happen again. Things are getting shut down, so processes are speeding up. And if the government really needs to get them through, what they're saying is, right, here's the consultation. It's very strict. We need to get it in because we need to get it passed before the election. And of course, as a consequence of that, consultation suffers. Look at the way in which the constitutional review that the Marae Party negotiated with National has been introduced into the public arena. It was very late, introduced without much fanfare. I think I saw 2 newspaper articles about it. It's going to be a rather strange process, but probably a process consistent with the fact that people don't think that it's that important. And certainly, I'd say at the moment we don't have a consensus to spend more resource in that area because New Zealanders don't see it as linked. They see constitutional as something very special and not linked to the ordinary. Not linked to the ordinary. I want to come back to that. And then the final thing is the tyranny of distance. Well, what's that got to do with public norm, eh? It's got everything. Because you see, we are facing all of these challenges globally. It is Plan B. And I think our ability as citizens and businesses and organisations to work with government and to come up with good solutions to fixing some of these issues that we face is diminished by the fact that people aren't very sophisticated at dealing with government. So government's focused on government and citizens are focused on their own issues, and the question is how to create opportunities, which is where I end. So what are the opportunities? I would like to posit the big idea that New Zealand should consider itself world-leading in terms of a problem-solving government which is citizens-focused in terms of priorities. Let me just say that again. World-leading in terms of a problem-solving government which is citizens-focused in terms of priorities. If you switched on the radio this morning, they're having the latest fight about Christchurch, and the latest fight is that they're setting up SERA. It sounds very benign, doesn't it, SERA, the Christchurch Emergency Response Agency. But the fight now is to make sure that that organisation is citizens-focused as opposed to being government-driven, which apparently is a different thing. So how will we achieve this? I think the opportunities are first to increase the quality of the policy debate. But if we are going to do that, there are a range of prerequisites. Yes, I know there are people still campaigning for fewer MPs because it just costs money. Well, it's true, but on the other hand, it's great to have a diversity of representation in Parliament. If you're going to increase the quality of the policy debate, though, you do need to give them more time. New Zealand is one of the few countries in the world, as Mason said, we don't have a written constitution and we have a 3-year term of government. That is not that normal. Most places have longer than that. They have 4 to 5 years. And people say, well, no, hang on, we want to be able to throw these people out every 3 years if they're hopeless. Well, it's lovely, but why don't you find some other mechanisms which still allow them, nevertheless, to do a better job on policy and legislation? I call that cutting off your nose to spite your face, because the fact of the matter is we're the only people who suffer if the policy and legislation is not as good as it could be. And I've been involved in lots of policy and law reforms where as soon as they get the legislation through, they're doing the amendment bill because it isn't right, it doesn't work. And there hasn't been enough consultation with the industry for us to be able to tell them that. So the once across slightly, dealing with the tough issues. Look, we've got a lot of them. Let me just take one. the treaty. Difficult issue, no one wants to touch it, too controversial, don't know how to engage. So we need to change the settings. And I think part of changing those settings is making sure, for example, that we do have better engagement. Look, as I look into the future, we are only on the start of the social media revolution. And yet, if you look at all the research, because I wrote a 40-page paper on it about the Constitution, do you know New Zealanders do go online? We are one of the peoples in the world who are most online literate. But do you know what we do? Well, we go on Trade Me, really. Sam's here. We go on Trade Me. The research shows that we don't use it to interact. We don't use it to engage in terms of citizenry and democracy and political ideas. Some people do, but it's generally just to check up on the website, which accords with their political orientation anyway. What I'm saying is there is huge opportunity here to engage. And to enrich the engagement and to increase people's effectiveness. I am donating all of my time, which is a lot. We're doing a $1 million fees waiver at Chen Palmer to write this book on the public law toolbox, because it's my learnings about how to operate in the sphere of government so that you can better and be more effective in terms of influencing policy and legislation. And I think the time is right for this, because that's what we need to do. We need to have a consciousness raising in this area if we want to achieve this world-leading organisation. Can I also say that I also think that this consciousness raising about how we relate to government is important, because we need to reconceive the citizen-state relationship. That citizen-state relationship is still very much one of David and Goliath. The government knows everything, it's all powerful, it can do all of these things, and we get it done to us and we don't know what's going on. Well, I don't think that's good enough. I think as citizens, it is capable of knowing. You should know. It is capable of becoming known what it is the government's is up to. The trends here are changing. It was very interesting. I've done some interviews for my book with MPs, and they tell me when they first started, they were in such a superior position because they knew everything and the constituent knew nothing. But now the constituent comes to them and says, look, I've got the bill and I've got the cabinet papers and I printed off the officials' papers, and I don't think what the government's doing here is right. So things have changed. So I would like to see going forward the opportunities that we could have equal information, and we're moving there with official information, that it's not David and Goliath, that citizens understand there are a range of public law tools to exact accountability and transparency, and to get better at solving these problems with government together, and so that we can lead the world. In terms of the constitutional evolution, what I'd really like to see is the extraordinary becoming ordinary. People say, oh, you do this rarefied thing, we're not interested, we don't know what that is. Look, I would like to see those conversations occurring every day. I met with News Talk yesterday. I've said to them that I'm not going to do talk back, but I've said to them that I'm happy to go on and talk about issues that are topical from a public law perspective to try and make the extraordinary ordinary. Because I think we need to be able to talk about these things and understand what impact they have on us. I mean, recently in the media, we've been talking about milk prices. Well, what does milk prices relate to? Actually, they relate to whether or not we've got competition in the domestic market. Well, what does that relate to? Well, how is it that Fonterra has 90% of the milk in the country? That relates back to the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act 2001. It relates to the raw milk regulations, which are passed under that act. It relates to a whole premise about bulking an organisation up so it could fight with the world, but always on the condition that there had to be competition in the domestic market. Look, I don't want to bore you by talking to you about various subjects, but what I'm saying is that at the ordinary end of every conversation, there is perhaps some extraordinary stuff behind it, but we need to make more of these ordinary conversations, I think, enlightened and consciousness raised about the interface with government so that we can achieve better. I think that's the opportunity for New Zealand going forward, and I look forward to the future coming to meet me. I remember a long time ago, I met someone who said, "You're so lucky to be Chinese." I didn't feel that way at the time. I have also seen the recent surveys that show that New Zealanders agree that the Asians are the most discriminated against in New Zealand. I thought that was extraordinary, Mason. I thought that would go tomorrow, but apparently we are the privileged ones. And that person said to me, in a generation's time, you will see the future coming towards you, and you will realise that it is great to be Chinese. Well, I'm waiting. But I say to you that actually the future is coming to meet me, and maybe in future what we will find is that we will all have to become literate in this interface with government, because it will become more critical for us that we can work with government to achieve those solutions that allow us to survive and thrive and to economically dominate in the world. Thank you.